Hello everyone. My name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So today we are talking about day 4 of our DevOps Zero to Hero course. For people who are just watching our videos for the first time, we are doing a 45 days of complete DevOps course, that is DevOps Zero to Hero, and today we are at day 4. If you haven't watched our previous videos, day 0, day 1, day 2 and day 3, I would highly recommend you to go and watch those videos first. So there is a DevOps Zero to Hero playlist on my channel, and those videos covers the previous topics, and this is typically virtual machines part 2. So in the previous video we talked about virtual machines, and where we talked about the evolution of virtual machines, what is a server, what is physical server, how a physical server is different from a virtual machine, what is the concept that allows you to create virtual machines, and we also looked at how data centers are getting extinct. Previously even a startup used to have their own data center, but now people are relying on platforms like OpenStack or AWS or Azure. So we also talked about those things. So it would be a really interesting one to watch part 1 before part 2. Now, today what we'll learn is we will learn about virtual machines in a advanced way. We will talk about how to create virtual machines. We will look at the top platforms or the top cloud providers today. You have AWS, you have Azure, and I'll also take a on-premise scenario so that if you're working in, people might be working in different organizations, so that everybody gets a feel of it. Like there is also Google Cloud Platform, but we cannot cover all of the topics. So what I'll try to tell you is how to create a virtual machine on these platforms. I'll talk about AWS, I'll talk about Azure, and then also say I'll also talk about how to create a virtual machine on on-premise. Let's say your organization has not shifted to cloud and they're still using their own data center, or they have their own servers. So how to create a virtual machine on those. So these are the different things that we would cover today. Okay, so before we start the video, I would like to just make a simple request that, I'm making these videos with utmost honesty, and you people know that this is a free DevOps course. So the only thing that I would expect from everyone is to promote these videos within your circle. And if anybody who is looking for these videos, like somebody is passionate about learning DevOps, then please do share these videos with them so that everybody is benefited out of these videos. Perfect. So going ahead, firstly, just a recap of what we have learned yesterday. So yesterday we learned that in DevOps, to create a virtual machine, you basically make a request to one of your cloud providers. I'll talk about on-premise later. So for now, just understand that we are dealing with cloud providers. Okay. So what we would do is we'll make a request with one of these cloud providers. Let's say we are only talking about AWS and Azure. So as an end user, what you would do is from your personal laptop. Let's say this is your personal laptop, and you are a guy who is sitting in front of this laptop, and you are in search of a virtual machine. So what you would do, you would log into something called as AWS console. Okay. By logging into AWS console, what you would do is you would make a request to AWS asking for a virtual machine. In AWS terminology, it is called EC2 instance. Don't worry if you are not aware of AWS. In this video, we will directly look at the AWS console. I'll show you how to create a virtual machine. And today we are not even deep diving into AWS. So don't worry, even if you have zero knowledge on AWS. I'll show you theoretically as well as practically how to create a virtual machine on AWS. And also we'll take a look at Microsoft Azure. So for theoretical understanding, what happens is there is a developer or there is a person called X, Mr. X, and what Mr. X would do is sitting in front of his laptop, he would open his favorite browser, and in his favorite browser, he would search for AWS console. Once he go to the AWS console, he can make a request with the AWS through the UI to create a virtual machine or EC2 instance. And what AWS would do is AWS in response would send you back something like an IP address and all the specification related to this virtual machine that you have requested. This is the end thing that happens, or this is the overall thing that happens if you're trying to create a virtual machine from the UI. And the same thing happens with Microsoft Azure as well, right? So whether it is Microsoft Azure or whether it is AWS, the process is the same. Again, there is a person who is sitting in front of his laptop. Let's call him Mr. X. And what Mr. X would do is instead of AWS on his favorite browser, he will try to open Microsoft Azure portal, which is Azure portal, right? Once he opens the Azure portal, don't worry, we'll also take a look at this practically. On the Azure portal, he will do the same thing. He would ask the Azure to create a virtual machine. In Azure terminology, we call it virtual machine only. And Azure would send back him the same response, right? The IP address plus all the specifications that are required to log in. So this is the process. But the important thing that we would understand is, okay, for creating one virtual machine, everything is fine. Like, you can log in, you can go through the UI and you can create a virtual machine. But as a DevOps engineer, always from class one, I teach you the same thing, that we have to focus on efficiency. Let's say you get 100 such requests. Okay, because in your organization you might have thousands of people, and if you get hundreds of the same requests, right, every day you receive the same request, people ask you to create a virtual machine. So would you go to your AWS portal 100 times and create a virtual machine? You can do that, but that does not add efficiency. So in DevOps, every day what we are talking is the same thing, that is efficiency. So as a DevOps engineer, you should always target in improving the efficiency of your routine tasks. So what you would do is you would look for automation. So AWS people also provides you the support for this automation, right? Because you are talking to AWS, AWS has to develop a feature that allows you to automate the stuff on AWS, right? So what happens is, in general, this is called a AWS API. Okay, so AWS provides you API. So in this case, we are talking about EC2. So it is called as AWS EC2 API, right? What is it called? AWS EC2 API. Because we are talking about EC2, for now, we are only talking about the AWS EC2 API. Similarly, if you want to create storage, AWS supports AWS S3 API. If you want to talk about volumes, AWS support AWS EBS API or the something else. So for now, understand that AWS people have developed something called as AWS EC2 API, and using this AWS EC2 API, the end user or the DevOps engineer who is using his laptop, what he can do is, instead of directly accessing the amazon.com or sorry, Amazon console from his favorite browser, what he can do is he can write a script. Okay, what this user would do, he would write a script, and using this script, what he would do, he would make a call to the AWS EC2 API, right? So he makes a call to AWS API, and in this script, what he'll say is, I want to create 10 EC2 instances. Okay, or he'll just write a script, and every time a user comes to him and asks for a EC2 instance, he would run the script and it would return one EC2 instance. Okay, even if you're writing a script to automate the process for creating one EC2 instance, and even if it is saving 1 minute of your regular time, okay, that is also called as a automation, right? Because there is no manual intervention. So when there is no manual intervention, that means there are no errors, right? Because manually you might commit some errors, but if you are automating the process and automation is doing things for you, so you are also avoiding errors and you're also saving your time. So this is the process. Now coming to the script, it can be done in multiple ways. Okay, so I'll talk about the different ways that AWS will allow you to create or automate the stuff on AWS. Now the process would be same for Microsoft Azure as well, so that is the reason why I'm not repeating AWS and Azure. So for now, understand that the process is same for any cloud provider. Today I'm talking about AWS, it can be Microsoft Azure, it can be Google Cloud Platform, DigitalOcean, or any cloud provider. Okay, the process is the same. What they would do is, for the service that they're providing, so it can be EC2 service, it can be storage service, or any service, what the cloud provider would do is they would write a API. So the developers at Amazon, what they would do is, they have hundreds of services, right? Amazon provide you hundreds of services today, and today we are dealing with EC2 service. In future we'll talk about the other services, but for the EC2 service there is a developer, right? Or there are bunch of developers. What these developers would do is, they would expose the API of this EC2 server. Okay, so this is the API. Now what happens is, this API would receive a request, and if it receives the request in the expected format, as a response, what we would do, it would send you a EC2 instance. right? So the AWS AWS EC2 API is responsible for receiving the request, and once it receives the request and the resource request is valid, authenticated, and authorized. Okay, what I am talking about, the three things. One is the request that you are doing should be valid. Valid is following all the standards this EC2 API is expecting, and then it should be authenticated. What is authenticated? The user who is making the request should have access to the AWS, and then authorized. Okay, sometimes as a user you might have access to AWS, but you don't have access to, or you are not authorized to create EC2 instance. So all these three criteria have to be matched. One is the request that the user is sending has to be valid, then he has to be authenticated, he has to be authorized. Once these three things are done, what happens is, as a DevOps engineer, now you can write a script. What your script has to do? Your script has to make an API call with AWS with a request that is matching all these criteria, that is valid, authenticated, and authorized. And as a output for the script, you would get a EC2 instance. Now, what is this script? I have been talking about script all this while. So now let's deep dive and understand what is the script actually. So the script can be multiple types. One is through CLI. Okay, so because we are talking about AWS, let me call this as AWS CLI. So as a DevOps engineer, you can automate the creation of your virtual machines or EC2 instance through AWS CLI. One, two, you can use AWS API itself directly, right? If you are familiar with the concept of let's say the REST API, how to write a REST API, and if you have exposure towards any programming language, you can directly deal with AWS API. And there are some modules, like if you are talking about Python, Python supports Boto 3. Okay, using Boto 3 module in Python, you can directly make a request to the AWS API. Now, this does not have to be, I mean, you don't have to be familiar at this point of time. Like, even if you don't know Python or Java or any programming languages, you can still use AWS CLI to automate the process. But for now, you should understand that AWS also allows you to write your custom scripts or your own scripts. And there are open source libraries or the modules that are available. And if for example, I'm familiar with Python, so in Python there is a module called Boto 3, and Boto 3 allows you to directly make a API call with AWS, any service, EC2 service or S3 service or any service. Now, the next approach is AWS supports something called as AWS CFT, that is called as Cloud Formation Templates. So the Cloud Formation Templates are templating language. It's a classic template. You AWS provides a definition or a proper structure. If you provide this template to the AWS will return you with 1 to n number of virtual machines that you have requested. So these are the different approaches. And finally, there is also a great competitor that is available in the market, that is Terraform. Now, if you put Terraform aside for now, because we have a separate class where we'll talk about Terraform, and Terraform is a is something that we cannot discuss for now, because people have to have certain level of expertise to deep dive into Terraform. And during the Terraform class, we will master this. We will learn zero to hero of Terraform. So for now, just understand that Terraform is one of the alternatives that is available to automate your resource creation. And the advantage with Terraform is that if you look at these three things, they are very specific to AWS, right? This is AWS CLI, this is AWS API, Boto 3, and this is AWS CFT. But Terraform, I did not mention as AWS because one Terraform, multiple cloud providers. So Terraform can automate your process in AWS, it can automate your process in Azure, it can automate your process in Google Cloud Platform, everywhere. Okay, now what is happening here is, using all of these things or any of these things, what you can do is you can directly talk to the AWS API, right? So what are these things doing? End of the day, they are directly talking to the AWS API. So who is writing the AWS API? The DevOps engineer or the developer at Amazon. What they are doing is they are exposing their EC2 instance using the API. And as a DevOps engineer, you can automate the process in your organization by using one of these things, that is AWS CLI, AWS API, CFT, or Terraform. Or if you're not aware of all of these things, what you can also do is you can also use the manual approach, right? As I explained, even using the manual approach, you can create, but the problem with manual approach is that you have to let's say you receive 100 requests, so 100 times you have to log into the AWS console and you have to create virtual machines one by one. That is against the pattern of DevOps because you are doing it in an inefficient way. In DevOps we always talk, and if in DevOps we always learn the efficient ways. So these are the different processes that are available. So in an interview, you can say any of these things. Like let's say somebody asks you in an interview, how do you create 10 virtual machines at once? Or what is the automation that you are using in your organization for infrastructure creation? What is a virtual machine? Virtual machine is an infrastructure, right? Or EC2 instance is an infrastructure. So people will ask you, what is the tool that you are using for infrastructure automation? Now, the very popular tool that is available in the market is Terraform. But remember, as I mentioned in our previous classes, don't do something because that is popular, or don't do something because it has to be done. Always look at your organization. What is your organization doing? Let's say your organization is completely focused with AWS, and in future also they only want to deal with AWS. Okay, you can use any of these things. You don't have to definitely move to Terraform, right? You can either use AWS CLI, API, or CFT. And AWS also supports additional things. Sorry, I forgot to mention, that is AWS CDK. Okay, that is AWS Cloud Development Kit, which is recently introduced. So you have four different options, right? Either you can use CLI, API, CFT, or CDK. So personally, if you ask me, if your organization is very focused on AWS and you know that your vision is AWS, like next 10 years or 15 years your organization is going to stick with AWS, you can use CDK over Terraform because CDK provides advanced or more uh, benefits over Terraform. Okay, so in an interview, you don't have to always mention that I'm using Terraform in the organization. No, you can say our organization using AWS CDK because CDK is very specific to AWS, and AWS has decided that they have their initial support. Let's say AWS is launching a new service. Okay, this service is called AWS XYZ. So the developers at AWS, they have to write an API for it, right? Similar to EC2, they have to write an API for XYZ. Now, once they write this API, who is going to get the first support? Terraform or CDK? Obviously CDK, because CDK is a proprietary tool of AWS, whereas Terraform is a open source tool, which is developed and maintained by HashiCorp or the other community members. So to have initial support or to have initial access for any automations on AWS, CDK is far better than Terraform. Similarly, CLI, API, or CFT as well. So always choose your answers wisely, and whenever you are projecting yourself for a DevOps interview, make sure that your basics are and your foundation is clear. Now you might ask me, then when is Terraform used? So there are some organizations, or most of the organizations these days are choosing the hybrid cloud pattern. Okay, what is this pattern called? It's called hybrid cloud pattern. So what they're doing in the hybrid cloud model is that they have their virtual machines in one cloud platform. They have their other resource infrastructure in a different cloud platform. Either it can be because of the efficiency. Let's say Google Cloud Platform. Google Cloud Platform is very popular for its AI and ML stuff. Okay, if you're talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence, Google Cloud Platform leads, or it's a compared to be better than these things. Or some people prefer Kubernetes on Google. So that's why these days organizations are choosing hybrid cloud model. They have their AI and ML stuff on Google. They have their other stuff like RDS or something on AWS. It's individual choice depending upon the organization requirements to requirements. So that's why if you are using a hybrid cloud model, Terraform is definitely a best fit for you because you have to automate infrastructure across the different cloud platforms. Whereas if you are on a single cloud platform and your organization will stick to be in a single cloud platform, then choose your answer wisely and go with either CDK, CLI, API, or if you're on Azure, you can talk about Azure Resource Manager because those things are pioneers or they have early access to any resources on that cloud platform. Perfect. I think now we have talked a lot about these things. Now let's get practical, right? So you need to understand how to manage or how to deal with these things. So before that, firstly, I'll show you how to deal with AWS through the UI. And once we understand that, probably we can talk about the automation that is using CLI or CFT or something. And parallelly, I'll also show you with Microsoft Azure. Let me just stop sharing the screen and go with a new one. Uh, okay. Oh, how do I do that? Here, if I click on share, just give me a moment. Perfect. Okay, sorry, I'm still finding my screen. Just give me a moment. Okay, perfect. So now I'm sharing my AWS console screen, right? Let's say you don't have access or you are very new to cloud and you want to create an account with AWS. It's a very simple practice. What you have to do is you have to come here, okay, go for signin.aws.com, okay, or you can simply click on AWS console. Just go to your browser and say AWS console. It will redirect you to this page. If you have already have an account with AWS, you can proceed with your sign in, provide your user mail ID, or if you don't have, what you can do is you can come down and you can click on create a new AWS account. Once you click on create a new AWS account, it would just ask you for some questions, okay, and you will be proceeded with creating an AWS account. So there are no ifs and buts there. Like, you can directly follow the step-by-step approach, and finally you will be asked with the card details. And once you provide the card details, it will deduct, if you are in India, it will deduct 2 rupees INR from your account just to validate that you are a authentic user and providing a valid card details. And once you are done with that, your AWS account will be created. Now, don't worry that AWS will not charge you for any virtual machines that you are created if you are using a free instance. I'll also show you how to use a free instance. Don't worry about it. Now, let me just stop sharing for a moment so that I can hide my user details. Stop share and let me log in. Okay, coming here. So I have provided my user ID. Sorry for not sharing the screen, but I have to enter my password, and my password details are entered. Now let me see. Let me go back and share my screen. Perfect. So I hope you are looking at the right screen again. Perfect. So now what you do is, once you're done with it, come here and search for the services. So AWS provides you a bunch of services. Okay. And you have to choose wisely what the service that you want to use. So in my case, I'm sure that I want to use a AWS EC2 service. So you can click on the EC2 service, and what you will do is you look at the instances or the services that are available here. What you would do is you would come to the AWS EC2 global view, and perfect. Let me just go back here. And what I'll do is I would go to the instances, and what I'll do is I'll click on the launch instance. Okay. So click on the launch instance and provide these details. Okay. Now what you are doing, you are talking to the AWS UI directly. You are not doing any API calls, or this is not a process of automation. What you are doing, everything is a manual process. Okay. So what you do here, you would provide the details here. Let's say test. Okay. Let me call my AWS instance name as test. And then you have to choose over the wide range of operating systems that AWS provides you. You can choose Amazon Linux, you can choose Ubuntu, Windows, Red Hat. For a first comer, or if you are just learning about DevOps and everything, I would prefer Ubuntu, and I would recommend you to use Ubuntu because Ubuntu is widely used in the DevOps community, but you can go with any other options as well. And after that, see, this is very important. Choose free tier eligible. Okay, because we want to try out things, and we are not going to pay any amount to the AWS for the instances that we're using. So always choose the free tier available. What is the difference between free tier and the paid ones? So in free tier, you get very restricted amount of resources. So here if you see, I'm only dealing with one CPU and 1 GB memory. But if I am going to go to the subscription model, or if I'm going to pay AWS, then I can choose larger virtual machines. Here if you see T2 large, I'm getting 2 CPUs and 8 GB memory, but I'm going to be charged. But if you are using the free tier available or free tier eligible options, you'll not be charged by AWS. Then after that, for the very first time, you have to create your key value pair with AWS. What is key value pair? So key value pair is something that would allow you to log into your EC2 instance. Okay. Once you create your AWS EC2 instance, you would get the IP address, but there has to be a password kind of thing to log into your virtual machine, right? So that's why click on create new key value pair. Okay. Let me call it as test key value pair, or let me say test 1111. And now go with the defaults, choose RSA. You don't have to know about ED for now. This is different. RSA is a kind of thing, and ED is a different encrypted public and private key methodology. But for now, just go with RSA, that is default. And PEM should be fine for the private key file format. Now click on create key value pair. That would be saved. It would be downloaded and saved in your local. This would be very useful to log in. Once your key value pair is gone, then it is almost impossible to log into your EC2 instance. So make sure you save your key value pair. Then we are not going to talk about any of these things at this point of time. I'm not going to explain you what is a security group, what are the VPCs and all at this point of time, because today we are just learning about installing a virtual machine. And for the beginners who are watching our videos, I don't want to confuse them by explaining about the advanced concepts of a virtual machine or compute instances. And then click on launch instance. That's it. Now, once you click on the launch instance, your virtual machine is created. You don't have to do anything else. Just wait for a couple of minutes, go back to the instance screen. Your EC2 instance is available here. Okay, it would take a couple of minutes. Now, while we wait for this, I would also parallelly show you how to create instances on Microsoft Azure. You don't have to do anything new or anything fancy apart from the things that we are doing on AWS. What you do is click on portal.azure.com. Okay, on your browser, go for portal.azure.com. It would ask you for sign up. And one good thing about Microsoft Azure is they have inbuilt integration with GitHub. Okay, so if you are a user for GitHub, user on GitHub, you already have a GitHub account, like I do. What I've done is I have signed up with GitHub. If you see here, this is a GitHub icon that I'm showing here. So using GitHub, I've logged in. It would take less than a couple of minutes for you to log in. Once you are done with it, see here, I'm not holding any paid account with Microsoft Azure. One difference between Azure and AWS here is if you are a new player or if you are just learning DevOps, AWS provides you close to 1 year free membership on AWS, whereas Azure only provides you some 30 to 45 days. I don't remember exactly, but AWS provides you longevity so that you can play around and try AWS for more time. Whereas on Azure, you have to buy after this 1 month, or let's say, no, I want to create a virtual machine with Azure, which I'm show you. I have to pay money. So click on create a resource. Okay, or there is an option directly for virtual machines. So I personally feel that the Azure user interface or user experience is slightly better than AWS. Like click on create virtual machine and provide the same details that you're going to provide. For now, I don't hold a free account. So if you are starting with a free Azure account, then you just follow the same steps. Click on start. I'm not going to go with the pay and use. I would go for start free, but I'm already done with my free membership. So if you have a free membership, then you provide the same details that you have done with AWS, and your virtual machine would be created on Azure as well. So whether it's AWS or Azure, the process is the same. Now, if you see here, our AWS EC2 instance is up and running. Okay, once this AWS EC2 instance is up and running, you can either log in from the UI, or using the key value pair, you can also log in using the terminal. So those things I'll show in the next class, and I'll also show you how to automate these things, right? Because we should also look at the automation. For now, I just showed you how to create an account with AWS and Microsoft Azure, how to create these resources through the UI. But if you want to learn how to create them, how to log in into them using the automation process, wait for my next class, which would be tomorrow. And in that video, I'll show you how to automate the process. I hope you watch. I hope you like this video. If you like the video, click on the like button. If you have any feedback for me, good or bad, please do post that in the comment section. I would happy to reply to each and every comment. And finally, don't forget to subscribe my channel if you haven't. Abhishek Veeramalla. Thank you so